Good day, grade 11 learners. Welcome to the Life Sciences lesson. My name is Shabnam Sukhnandan. This lesson is brought to you by the Sci-Bono Discovery Center in collaboration with the Gauteng Department of Education. So learners, we are now going to be looking at the next lesson of gaseous exchange system, which deals with the functioning of ventilation. All right. So now if you're going to look at the ventilation, now we're going to speak more deeper with regards to the process of inhalation and exhalation. So let us first see, do you remember that last week we spoke about we spoke about breathing, right? And we spoke about that breathing is a mechanical process whereby you can actually see the physical process of breathing. And what is breathing? Where air moves in and out of the lungs as a result of differences in the atmospheric pressure. So for air to move into the lungs, the pressure outside in the air must be higher than the pressure inside the lungs. And because of that diffusion gradient, air will move into the lungs from high atmospheric pressure outside to low atmospheric pressure within the lung. Okay. It involves different muscles and volume and pressure changes in the thoracic cavity. So this, learners, is basically our thoracic cavity, okay? Here's our thoracic cavity, that is your chest cavity. That's your chest cavity, right? And within your chest cavity, it's the volume, the size that must increase when you're inhaling, and that's due to the muscles contracting and relaxing to bring air in to the lungs. All right. So here you can see how the thoracic cavity has moved outwards, down and out. So the volume has increased for inhalation. And here you can see the thoracic cavity, the volume has decreased because it has moved up. The volume has moved up and in, and therefore has decreased due to the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. So this first slide is basically telling you that ventilation involves inhalation and exhalation. And what is it? It's a mechanical process, and it's responsible for the movement of the lungs because of the thoracic cavity expanding outwards when you inhale, and the thoracic cavity decreases in volume when you exhale to force air out of the lungs. All right. So now we need to know exactly where is the gaseous exchange system or the ventilation system in the human body. The exchange of gases occurs in two areas of the body. So we have gaseous exchange, means gases are exchanged at two levels. The first level is at the alveoli surface. Do you remember we spoke about the alveolus being a pouch-like structure, like many grapes or little grapes in a bunch? The whole bunch is like the whole group together making up the lung. So each little grape represents like an alveolus of the lung. All right. So you have lots and lots of alveolus that forms the lobe of a lung. All right. That's the lobe of the lung. So one is called an alveolus, many is an alveoli. So gases always go from the alveolus into the blood and from the blood to the cells. So it occurs at the alveolus surface, that's in the lung, and it also occurs between the blood and the cells. And we'll see more diagrams just now. So let us look at some of the terminology that you need to know for this topic. It's the diaphragm. Please look at the spelling. Don't confuse it with diagram. That will be wrong. Diaphragm, and the PH was like spelled, pronounced as an F. Diaphragm. And what is the diaphragm? Here is your diaphragm. So let's label it. Can you see? It's a muscular sheath. Here is the diaphragm. Okay. And this muscular sheath, because it's muscular, it can contract and relax. Okay. So when it contracts, this diaphragm moves down. And then on the sides over here of your lungs, you have little muscles called your intercostal muscles. Okay, that intercostal muscle also contracts and relax, and it will cause the rib cage to move, the thoracic cavity to expand outwards. So here's your diaphragm and here's your intercostal muscles. Okay, and they are responsible for changing the volume of your thoracic cavity in which your lungs are found. So inhalation means breathing in of air with oxygen, and exhalation means breathing out of air with lots of carbon dioxide. Okay, so you know what are the muscles? The diaphragm and the intercostal muscles, and here's your lungs embedded and enclosed within your rib cage. Okay, your intercostal muscles have bones attached to them, which are the ribs. All right, and within the rib cage is your lungs. Now here we're going to look at the process of inhalation, and you need to know this. So here is a little sketch showing you that when air moves in, remember last week we spoke about the voice box, the larynx, then it moves through the trachea, and then it moves to the bronchus and the bronchiole and into your lungs. And here is your diaphragm, which is going to move down because your lungs need to expand. It needs space. So during inhalation, when the air moves into the lungs, what happens? The diaphragm muscle contracts, okay? It contracts and it moves down. Now normally the diaphragm is dome shaped, but when it contracts, it moves down and becomes flattened. Okay, so it's going to move down and become flattened. So there's going to be more space now. So instead of it being like this, it moves down, right, and then gives it more space. The external intercostal muscles between the ribs also contract. So just remember this, learners. During inhalation, the diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles will contract. So basically the intercostal muscles and the diaphragm contract. Okay, now when the intercostal muscles on the side contract, what happens to it? It causes the rib cage to move up and out. And when the diaphragm contracts, the diaphragm moves down and becomes flattened. Okay, the rib cage moves up and out. Air pressure in the lungs decreases now because there's more space. You see, the rib cage is moving up and out. The diaphragm moves down. Now there's more space. When there's more space, there is less pressure. There's no pressure on the lungs now because it's very spacious. So as the air pressure in the lungs decreases, the chest volume will increase. That means the volume increases, the pressure will decrease. Okay. Atmospheric pressure now, the pressure outside the lungs, is higher than the pressure inside the lungs. So it's going to be high pressure here and low pressure there. And obviously air is going to always move from a high to a low pressure. Then the inhalation is an active process because the muscles are busy contracting. So let's summarize. During inhalation, diaphragm and external intercostal muscles contract. Right. Next one. If the diaphragm contracts, what happens to it? It moves from a dome shaped downwards to become flattened. And then what happens? It increases the size of the thoracic cavity. When the intercostal muscles, when they contract, the rib cage will move up and out, and it increases the size of the volume of the thoracic cavity. When the size increases or the volume increases, there's going to be less pressure around the lungs. So the volume increases, the size increases, and there's less pressure. And then the pressure outside is going to be high, and then that causes air to move into your lungs. That's how you can breathe better. Now, if you go down to the coastal regions, like if you go to Durban and you're sick, you find that it becomes very difficult for you to breathe because the air pressure in Durban or in the coastal regions is lower than the air pressure in in the inland or higher regions. That's why people who are asthmatic, they normally move to the Transvaal or Gauteng, because we live on a higher altitude, and a higher altitude means higher air pressure. Whereas at low altitudes along the sea level, the pressure is low. So air can't move from low to low. Can you see that? So therefore, they have difficulty breathing. So the air pressure in the coast is high, but is not as high as in the Gauteng. That is why people find it much easier to breathe at higher altitudes compared to the low altitudes at sea level, where the pressure is lower. Okay, so therefore we say inhalation is an active process because of muscle contraction. Right, let's go to exhalation. It's the opposite now. Now, in inhalation, if the diaphragm and intercostal muscles contract, during exhalation, the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles relax. Now, when they relax, the diaphragm will move back to its normal dome-shaped position. The rib cage moves down and in. And what's happening? The volume or the size of the thoracic cavity will decrease. Okay, so once the size of the thoracic cavity decreases, now the space is becoming less around the lungs. So the pressure within the thoracic cavity is going to be high because there's less space, more pressure on the lungs. So now, when there's less space or less volume and the pressure is high, it's going to cause air to be forced out. Air containing carbon dioxide after cellular respiration in the cells. So the diaphragm will relax, and it will actually move upwards. Can you see how the diaphragm moved upwards here? Because it's relaxed, right? It's pressing against the lungs. The intercostal muscles also relax, and the rib cage moves down and in, and therefore the air pressure in the lungs will increase now, high air pressure, because less space. And then because the pressure is high inside, and therefore is comparing to the air pressure outside, is going to be low. So here there's going to be a high air pressure, and outside there'll be a low air pressure, and air will move out from high to low, and we exhale the air. Then that air is forced out, and exhalation we say is passive because the muscles are relaxing. Which muscles are involved in breathing? The diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. Okay, so here you can see exhalation, how the diaphragm moved up and out, upwards, became dome-shaped, and obviously the rib cage will move down and in, and that creates a high pressure in the lungs because the volume or size of the rib cage has decreased, but the pressure increased and air is going to be moving out, and that process is called exhalation. Now we're going to do a small little activity based on exhalation and inhalation. So learners, this is very important for you to understand the investigations. Grade 11 learners carried out an investigation, right, and you must have done that in your SBA, to determine the effect of physical activity, that means running or jumping or hopping on the spot, on the rate and depth of breathing. So if you are actively running on the spot or jogging, right, or picking up something, what happens to your rate, the how fast is your breathing, and how many breaths are you going to take in, and how fast is your breathing going to be? So the learners carried out this procedure. The procedure for the investigation was as follows. They chose 5 learners. So 5 learners were chosen of the same age, so same amount, 5. Same number of learners, then the same age, maybe 16 years old, and then they measured the heart rate by just taking a stethoscope and listening to the heart rate and counting it using a little digital clock. You can count in 1 minute how many times did the heart beat. So if every minute you stop and you count how many times it breathes, then, and you carry on like that for how many minutes is the heart beating. Right, so they measure the heart rate, and also somebody can count the breathing rate, okay? The breathing rate and the heartbeat when the person is jogging. Right, before exercise, so they measure the heart rate and breathing rate of each learner before the physical. So first you measure in 1 minute, how many times is this person breathing? How fast is the heart beating? You can also use your pulse to actually determine the heart rate or the heartbeat, how many times it's beating in a minute, and record it. So before exercise, record it and put it in a table. So you're going to record a table. You're going to put here, for example, when you are resting, and then when you are jogging, and you're going to look at heartbeat, how many times when you're resting and you're jogging, it was beating 10 times per minute, and when you were resting, it was 5 times per minute. And then you're going to look at your breathing rate, that when the person was resting per minute, the breathing rate was maybe 10 breaths per minute, whereas when you're jogging, it was 25 breaths per minute. See? So now you made a table of data, you recorded your table of data, and you said, before exercise, when he was resting, it was 5 beats per minute. Then when he, okay, 5 beats. And then when he was resting, his heart, okay, the breaths, 10 breaths per minute. So here you can see automatically when the person is jogging or running or exercising, his breathing rate increases as well as his heartbeat increases. Okay, because you need to pump more oxygen to the cells, and you need to get rid of the CO2 also very, very fast. The learners each walked a distance of 5 kilometers and also ran a distance of 5 kilometers. So they just wanted to see if you're just walking for 5 kilometers. So they kept the distance the same, they kept the age the same, and they also made them do the same type of exercises, and they also kept the same sample size. So all this business of same size, same kilometers, same learners, it all contributes to what we call validity in an investigation. So here's the physical activity, learners. The person is resting, then they counted right. When he is resting, his heart, according to his pulse rate, was beating 71 times per minute. And he had his breaths per minute was just 12 breaths. When he was walking, we can see that his heart rate increased from 71 to 88, and his number of breaths increased from 12 to 13. Not much, because he's just walking now. But the minute you do strenuous physical activity where muscles are now involved for you to run, now his heart rate increased from 120 beats per minute, and his breathing increased from 12 to 17 breaths per minute. You can see that his rate and depth of breathing has increased, and his heartbeat has increased when you are running compared to at resting. All right, so that is the activity, right? And now we're just going to look here, and we're going to just erase this here now. Okay. Let's just erase. Get that eraser. Right, and then let's look at the questions. Identify the independent variable. What could you control as an investigator? You couldn't control how fast the person's heart's going to beat, how many breaths he's going to take. That's what you can't control. So what you can't control is a dependent variable, the number of breaths, the rate of heartbeats. But what you could control is you can control the type of activity. So the independent variable will be the physical activity you're giving. Is the person running, or is he jogging, or is he resting? So you're going to know that on my independent variable, which is my x-axis, okay, so here is my independent variable, right, and that's my x-axis. I'm going to have at rest, then I'm going to have when he's walking, then I'm going to have when he's running. So that is my three parts to my independent variable, the type of activity. That's my label, physical activity or type of physical activity, resting, walking, and running. All right. State 2 planning steps the learners considered for this investigation. So when you're doing an investigation, you must always plan what you're going to be doing, when you're going to be doing. So what are some of the planning steps? Because you're involving people, you must ask the person, can I have the permission for me to conduct an investigation on how fast your heart beats when you're resting and when you're running? Then the person would say yes, and then you give them a little permission slip to fill, so you know that you have evidence that you asked for permission before you did the investigation. So that is permission, and that is because you're dealing with people, you can ask for permission. Also, you need to determine before the investigation how many participants are you going to use. And by determining how many, it means your sample size. So you also determine your sample size. You also need to know for how long are you going to make them run. So the duration of the investigation. You also need to know, for example, how many people you want. That's your sample size. How long you're going to make them run. The duration of the investigation. Exactly what time of the day are you going to be doing your investigation? Is it in the evening when they're tired, or is it in the morning when they're more active or more alert? So the time of the investigation, the duration of the investigation, the sample size, the permission. Those are some of the planning steps. And also, most important, you need to know how am I going to collect my data, and how I'm going to record my data. All right. So any two, so you can ask them for permission, you can decide on the type of activity you're going to give them, you're going to decide how you're going to measure the heart rate and the breathing rate, you're going to decide how to record your data, you can decide where am I going to be doing the investigation, is it in the classroom or outside, right? So those are some of the planning steps. So state one way in which the learners ensured validity. Now validity means how did they ensure that it was a fair investigation. You can't take 5 learners to run and 20 to sit down. You can't take somebody who's 30 years old and another one that is 6 years old. So you have to have the same age, same type of exercise. You can't let one run for 5 minutes and another run for 1 hour. So the duration of the exercise must be the same. If you are going to talk about, now I'm going to measure the person's activity, let's say when he's walking. You can't take it for 1 minute and then measure another one for 10 minutes. So the time taken to measure the breaths and to measure the heart rate must be the same. So all that same age, same gender, same type of exercise, same duration, ask for permission. Those are all planning steps. And they also contribute to validity when you keep things the same because you're making it fair. So state one way in which the learners ensured validity. They were of the same age, they walked the same distance, 5 kilometers, they ran the same distance when they're doing physical activity, 5 kilometers, okay? So that could be the same. And what else? Same age, same distance, and also the same person can actually record the data, right? So that also can be part of your validity. Now we're going to look at a model that demonstrates our breathing mechanism. So at school, you can actually make your own breathing mechanism using a Coke bottle, a plastic Coke bottle. So if you have a plastic Coke bottle like that, right? Okay. So what you do is, learners, you cut this part of the Coke bottle and you turn it upside down. So it's cut here and it's cut there, right? Here's the opening, okay? So now what you can do is you can make a simple one by just taking the cut part of the Coke bottle here, right? And you flip this downwards like that. Okay, this part here. And then you're going to take a small little like straws and attach straws there like this. Okay, and you're going to insert it in here. So you're going to do this. Okay, let us do this. So let us now take this here like that. That's the cut part of the bottle. Okay, and then what you're going to do is you're going to take a little like a straw, okay, a straw like that, and another 2 straws like this. All right, and you're going to tie some balloons in there, and you can close it up there, right? Are you going? Am I right now? What you do? Okay, okay. Let us not do that. Okay, let us not do that. Let us now erase this here completely, children. We're going to have a bell jar. Well, this is called a bell jar experiment. So please, you need to know what is the name of this that we can devise. It's called a bell jar. This jar now is open on the top. So you just have a normal glass bottle like this, right? It comes like that. It's open at the bottom, and then you're going to put a piece of plastic or a rubber sheet like that, right? And you're going to make sure that it's tied with a rubber band, sealed completely. Now this top is open. You're going to put a small rubber stopper here. You get rubber stoppers, and you're going to make a hole in the rubber stopper here, right? And you're going to make a hole, and you're going to put like a little glass tube, and then you have a glass tube here. And then obviously what you're going to do before you put the rubber stopper, you're going to take the rubber stopper out. You're going to put a glass tube in, and then you're going to have your rubber stopper out first like this, right? You're going to put your glass tube in. So here's your rubber stopper with the opening, and then you're going to take a little like straw there and a straw there and tie it on the outside, okay? And then you're going to take like little balloons, and you're going to tie the balloons there like that, very firmly tie the balloons. So these balloons represent your lungs, and here's your rubber stopper, okay? Now you're going to take that and you're going to insert it into this glass bell jar like that. All right, here they're just showing you 1 balloon, but you can put 2 balloons, but just to show somebody inhalation and exhalation. And then this is a rubber sheet. So this rubber sheet, what does it indicate in our body? It simulates or it represents our diaphragm. So this rubber sheet in the bell jar represents our diaphragm. This glass bell jar here represents our rib cage and the intercostal muscles. But now remember, this glass jar is rigid. It can't move up and down. So that is a shortcoming of this bell jar. And they can ask you the question, what does this bell jar not show you in reality? It doesn't show you the movement of the rib cage. So although the bell jar represents your thoracic cavity, it doesn't show you the expanding and deflating of the rib cage, the big expanded volume, the smaller volume, bigger volume, smaller. It doesn't show you the movement of the rib cage. It doesn't show you the intercostal muscles, right? But what it does show you that this is a rubber sheet diaphragm that represents a diaphragm. This little glass tube here represents our bronchus, our trachea, right? And then this part here, that's a trachea. And this part here is like your bronchus. And here the balloon represents your lung. You can see the balloon is very tight. So now what you can do is, when you press this little rubber sheet or plastic upwards, you press it up because the diaphragm moves upwards. You find that air is going to be forced out, and then your lungs becomes deflated. Then you pull the rubber sheet down, okay? When you pull it down, it means the volume, top-down volume space is increasing. And then air is going to move through your glass tube, which is your trachea, through there, through your bronchus, and you'll see now, because air pressure is going to be higher outside, it's going to draw air in. Why? Because you are pulling the diaphragm down, so your pressure inside here decreases, and the pressure outside is higher, and air will move in. So this apparatus is actually showing us what? It is showing us how to actually use a bell jar to demonstrate the breathing mechanism. So for each of the model parts listed below, provide an appropriate name for the corresponding part in the human respiratory system. So what does the glass tube represent? It's on the outside, so that's going to represent what? Our trachea. Can you see that? Ne? What does the balloon represent? It represents our lung. What does the bell jar represent? It's the whole cage. It's going to represent what? The bell jar. It's going to represent this whole thing here, which is going to be our chest or thoracic cavity. But the bell jar on its own is representing the rib cage and the intercostal muscles. But the shortcoming or the downfall is that it won't show the contraction of the muscles and the movement of the rib cage. But we know that that is representing the rib cage, and the space inside where the balloon is representing our thoracic cavity. So that is going to be our thoracic cavity, okay? Yeah. So that's going to represent the thoracic cavity. That balloon is going to represent the lung, and that is going to represent the trachea. And this one here is going to represent our bronchus. All right. Now, what does the rubber sheet represent? It represents our, so this rubber sheet represents our diaphragm, which is going to move down when you inhale and up when you exhale. So, let's see. Does B represent an active or passive process in the human mechanism of breathing? So, B, this is B. Here the lung is inflating. And when will the lung inflate? When you are breathing in. And what did we say, learners? When you breathe in or inhale, the diaphragm and your intercostal muscles must contract. And because they're contracting, the process becomes active. So, B is going to be an active process because this diaphragm contracts and moves down. So, it's an active process. What happens to the air pressure in the bell jar at B? Because air is going to move in, air always moves from high pressure to low pressure. So, what happens to the air pressure when you inhale? Within the thoracic cavity is going to decrease. All right. What happens to the volume or size of the space in the bell jar at B? See, because the diaphragm moved down, see, compared to this one where it's up, this one moved down. So, the top bottom volume is more. So, therefore, the volume is going to increase at B where there's inhalation. It will increase. What do you see as restrictions to the models when comparing them to the actual human body? So, this is just a representation of the breathing mechanism. But what is this bell jar not really showing you in reality? I told you it's not showing you what? It does not move. That means the bell jar doesn't expand or deflate. It does not move, but the lungs only do. So, the model demonstrates one lung, whereas humans have two lungs. So, in this particular one here, the reality is showing you that as if the humans have one lung, but we know we have a left and a right lung. All right. Also, it's showing you that our rib cage is rigid and doesn't move, and it's false. Our rib cage does move up and out, down and in. Up and out inhalation, down and in during exhalation. So, that's the two things that it's not showing. The movement of the rib cage, and it's only representing one lung when we have two lungs. Now, children, if you want to test whether you are breathing well, are you taking enough oxygen? Because now in COVID time, people had to go to the pulmonologist who actually can test for respiratory diseases. And they want to see, are you taking in enough oxygen for your whole body to get it, or you are having shallow breathing. And if you don't have enough oxygen, that is how people were dying during COVID. Their lungs were getting clogged with mucus and air couldn't come into its maximum. So when they tried to blow through a spirometer, right, this fluid couldn't go up. If this fluid goes right up, then it means that your lungs are inflating quite well and taking lots of oxygen in. So if the person is trying to blow, but you find that this little ball here or this fluid just moves a little, it means his lungs is not inflating well. It's just inflating a little. He's just breathing very, very shallow and very little oxygen is entering. So what do we call an instrument to measure the volume of air taken in and out? We call it a spirometer. So a spirometer is an instrument used to measure the volume, how much air enters the lungs and leaves the lungs during inhalation and exhalation. So this is called a spirometer. So the person must blow in, and also the person must actually take a breath and blow in. So if he can blow, it means that his lungs can inflate well. Okay? And if he can't, that means it's not, his lungs are not actually inflating and deflating well. So this actually is the three balls will represent. So he's going to take breath in and he's going to blow, 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 blow. And if he blows quite a lot and the ball goes very, very high, so here it shows he's got, it's very, very good. But if the ball doesn't move high when he's trying to blow out, it means his lungs are not inflating and deflating to its maximum. Right. Functions of the gaseous exchange system. What's the purpose of us having a trachea, a bronchus, a lung, a diaphragm, and a rib cage with intercostal muscles? The main function of that is for gaseous exchange in humans to take place, for oxygen to come in from the air during inhalation, and that this oxygen-rich air must reach the alveolus of the lung, right? And that oxygen that's coming from the alveolus must go into the blood, and the blood must transport it to the cells for what? For respiration. And after respiration then, carbon dioxide from the cells of the body after respiration must go back to the lungs to be expelled during exhalation. So the function of gaseous exchange system is to take in air with oxygen from the outside high pressure to the lungs, in the lungs going to the alveoli. From there, the oxygen must go from the alveolus to the blood must take the oxygen to the cells for respiration. After respiration, the mitochondria of the cells, carbon dioxide is given off because of the breakdown of glucose. Carbon dioxide cannot stay in the body for a long time. It must move from the cells to the blood. From the blood, it must be pumped to the lungs, and then the heart will pump it to the lungs. And what happens? The air containing CO2 is breathed out or exhaled out of the body, because if the CO2 remains in the body, it can actually poison our cells by making our cells very, very acidic. So here, children, is a little diagram showing you gaseous exchange at an alveolus surface. So here's your alveolus, okay? It's a pouch. So this whole thing here, this whole thing, this is your alveolus. And this is a blood capillary. So it actually looks like this is our alveolus. And here's our blood capillary, very, very close to the alveolus. So that blood capillary comes from an artery. So an artery will branch into capillaries, and these capillaries are very close to this alveolus. And this alveolus, remember we spoke about last week, it must have 5 requirements that must satisfy gaseous exchange. One, the wall of the alveolus is very, very thin, so that oxygen can move rapidly from the alveolus into the red blood cells. From the cells, the CO2 can move from the cells in the blood, from the actual plasma in the blood capillary to your alveolus to be exhaled. So the blue arrows are showing you the pathway of CO2, and the red arrows are showing you the pathway of oxygen. So here oxygen is entering the alveolus of the lung and then diffusing through the thin squamous epithelium of the alveolus, through the thin wall of the blood capillary into your red blood cells to be carried away to the heart. You see? So this is gaseous exchange at the alveolar surface. And now cells, the cells are respiring and releasing CO2, and the CO2 goes to the heart, and the heart pumps the CO2 blood to the blood capillary, and the CO2 is higher in the capillary than the alveolus, and CO2 will move out because of what? Because of the diffusion gradient. So remember, learners, blood coming to the lungs from the heart has CO2. There's more CO2 in the blood coming from the heart to the lungs. So the CO2 will move from a high concentration through the thin membranes to a low concentration. And remember, we said that this alveolus is lined with moisture because gases must enter in a dissolved form. So it must be thin, it must be moist, and because the alveolus is pouch-like, oxygen can enter from all sides, maximum diffusion of oxygen. Carbon dioxide can go from the blood capillary and enter into the alveolus from all sides to be exhaled. So that is a moist, thin and large surface area because the alveolus is very rounded for maximum diffusion of gases. Thin, moist, large surface area, it must also have what we said, a transport system. Can you see the capillaries are close contact with the alveolus so that oxygen and CO2 can rapidly move between the two. Oxygen to the blood and CO2 from the blood to the alveolus. So it must have what you call a transport system. And also they must be in close contact. And you see how closely they are, the alveolus and the blood capillary, for gases to move very, very fast between the two surfaces. So let us see. The air entering the alveoli, one alveolus, many alveoli. The air entering the alveoli has a high oxygen concentration compared to the oxygen in the blood. So when you breathe in air, there's more oxygen in the lung than the blood. So oxygen diffuses in. And then the blood leaving the lung, okay? So the blood entering the lung is going to have more CO2 than oxygen, and CO2 will diffuse from the blood to the lung. Right. So let's see. The inhaled air has a lower carbon dioxide concentration. Okay. So you can see air coming in. We breathe in air with more oxygen. That is 20% oxygen. So air breathed in, inhaled air, has at least 20% oxygen and only 0.04% CO2. But when you exhale, the air there is going to have 16% oxygen because you used 4%. Depending, if you're running, you're gonna get actually maybe when you exhale the air, right? Out of 20%, probably you will get maybe, let's say, 8%, which means now you're going to be using 12% when you are running. Okay, and only 8% is going to be exhaled. Here, 16% is going to be exhaled if you are just walking or running and just keeping still. All right, and then obviously, learners, when you exhale air, it's going to have more CO2, almost like about 1.4% of CO2 when you exhale. All right. So this results, so let's see, gaseous exchange at the alveolus. Inhaled air has less CO2 compared to carbon dioxide. So inhaled air has more oxygen and less CO2. Okay. This results in oxygen moving from the alveolus into the blood. Inhaled air has less carbon dioxide, but in the alveolus compared to the blood. But now the blood coming to the lungs will have more CO2 from the cells compared to the lungs. So the CO2 will move from the blood where there's high concentration to the lungs or the alveolus, and we exhale that air. So here you can see CO2 is moving from a high concentration in the blood to a low concentration in the alveolus and out. That's exhalation. And when we inhale air from the air where there's plants, they're giving off oxygen, air is going to move in. It has more oxygen, and then the oxygen is going to have a higher concentration in the alveolus, and then it will diffuse into the red blood cells, and the oxygen is going to be carried now. All this oxygen is going to be carried to the cells. So here you're going to see now, that was lungs and blood. Now we're going to see gaseous exchange between blood and cells. So first you're going to have lungs and blood. That is the lungs, that is the alveolus, right? That's your alveolus, and blood. And now we're going to have between blood and your different cells. Okay, so that's the two cells. Here's your cells in your body. Could be your stomach cells, your hand cells, your legs, your muscle cells. And here's the blood capillary. And here's your red blood cells. You remember you learned that in grade 10. So coming from the heart now. So coming from the heart, what's going to happen is that blood is going to be pumped, all right? And then what's going to happen is that from the cells, carbon dioxide will move from the cells to the blood. Then that carbon dioxide is going to be carried to the heart. The heart is going to pump the carbon dioxide to the lung. Ne? Here's it. And what we're going to do, the CO2 comes from the cells to the blood, from the blood to the lungs, and the lungs will exhale the CO2. Now when we're inhaling it, oxygen will move from the air to the lungs. Now the lungs got a lot of oxygen. It's going to move from the lungs to the heart. And the heart's going to pump all that oxygen to your cells. And the cells will get it for what? For cellular respiration. Okay. So now you need to know, learners, what are the forms in which carbon dioxide and oxygen is carried. So most of the carbon dioxide is transported in the plasma. So here you have your blood cells, okay? And here you're going to have your blood cells here. And here's your liquid in your blood capillary, okay? Sorry about that. Here's your blood capillary. And you're going to have fluid in your blood called plasma. And you're going to have your red blood cells, okay? Now, in this fluid called plasma, oxygen is going to dissolve. So, the first form in which oxygen is carried in a solution in the plasma. The second most important form is that oxygen is going to be carried in the form of oxyhemoglobin. So, the two forms in which oxygen is carried is solution in the plasma and in the form of oxyhemoglobin in your red blood cells. Okay. Just to go back here, you can see, okay, we've done that one, right? We can see that the air in the alveoli will be exhaled with more carbon dioxide, all right? And that most of the carbon dioxide is also transported in the plasma in the form of bicarbonate ions. Okay, so how is carbon dioxide going to be transported? Carbon dioxide is going to be carried in the form of sodium bicarbonate. That's what makes our blood alkaline. So carbon dioxide is going to be carried in the form of bicarbonate ions. Also, carbon dioxide dissolves in some of the plasma to form carbonic acid. Okay. So what are the two forms in which oxygen is carried in the blood? It's carried in the form of oxyhemoglobin, and it's carried in the form of solution in plasma. And what is the form in which carbon dioxide is carried in the blood? It's carried dissolved in plasma and also in the form of sodium bicarbonate. That's the two forms in which CO2 is carried. It can also be carried in the form of carbonic acid. All right. So here's your cells that are using oxygen, and then they are releasing carbon dioxide into the blood. Blood takes it to the heart. Heart pumps the CO2 to the lungs. You exhale it. You inhale again, air with oxygen. Oxygen moves from your lungs, okay, to your heart. The heart pumps the oxygen to the cells for respiration. And that's a continuous process of breathing and heartbeat that controls the oxygen and CO2 levels in your blood and cells. Right. Oxygen is transported mainly by red blood cells. What's another name for red blood cells, learners? It's called erythrocytes. What is the pigment found in your red blood cells? It's called hemoglobin. Most of the oxygen combines with the pigment hemoglobin present in your red blood cells to form oxyhemoglobin. Also, oxygen is transported to all cells for respiration to produce energy so the cells don't die. Here is a flow chart showing you gaseous exchange and transport of gases. Here's the air, the atmosphere. So what we're going to do, we're going to breathe air in, right? And how we're going to do that, we're going to pull air in, and when we do that, our diaphragm is going to contract and move down. The intercostal muscle is going to move up and out. That's inhalation. And air is going to come in rich in oxygen. From the air in the lungs rich in oxygen, it's going to go into the blood. From the blood, the oxygen is going to be pumped to the heart. And the heart is going to pump all the oxygen to your cells. For what? For respiration. And where does it happen? That happens inside your mitochondria, okay? So here's your mitochondria, like that. That's where respiration occurs inside your cells. And after respiration, CO2 is going to be given off. Let's just do this. Right, after respiration, CO2 is going to be given off, and that CO2 is going to move now from your cells to the blood, from the blood to the lungs, and then we are going to exhale that CO2, and we're inhaling the oxygen. So this is showing you a flow chart of what? Of inhalation and exhalation. And don't forget, learners, inhalation is active, diaphragm and intercostal muscle contract. Exhalation is passive. Diaphragm moves back to its normal shape, becomes dome shaped, it's relaxed, the intercostal muscles relax, and then the diaphragm moves up, and then the rib cage moves down and in, the volume decreases, and that's when air is going to be forced out, because when the volume decreases, the space is less, there's going to be less space and more pressure, forcing air to move out. So oxygen is continually entering the blood. At the moment, as you're sitting and watching TV, you are breathing. You are breathing in air with oxygen. Okay, so it's all the time entering. As long as you're alive and you are breathing in oxygen for respiration, to give your cells energy to do their work, for your heart to function, for your eyes to look at, for your ears to listen, for your hands to move, for your heart to function. You are needing oxygen. That the only way it can come from the body, from the outside to the body, is via the breathing of your lungs, right? So your oxygen is continually entering the bloodstream at the alveolus and transported to the body cells, and then carbon dioxide is transported from the body cells to the alveolus of the lungs, where it's going to be exhaled. Here is a person now. We want to know, how do we know that we are really breathing out carbon dioxide? Because we don't see anything coming out of a person's nostrils. Because carbon dioxide is an invisible gas in the air. But now, how do we test that? Really? Do we really breathe carbon dioxide? Is our cells really releasing carbon dioxide that comes to the lungs? And then you can do a simple little experiment using what we call lime water. So here's water that is clear, and then you take some soda lime crystals, right? You take some hot water, and then you're going to dissolve the soda lime in the water. And when you dissolve it, you then filter it and you put it into a test tube. So that soda lime now is going to be very clear. It's lime water or soda lime water, but it's clear, okay? So you take some soda lime and you dissolve it in the water, you filter it, and you pour it into a test tube. It's going to be clear soda lime water. Then you're going to take a straw and you're going to blow out. When you're blowing out, what are you blowing out? You're blowing out carbon dioxide from your cells. So you're going to blow the CO2 here, and slowly, as the water bubbles, the water will bubble, and CO2 that you see is invisible is going to enter this clear lime water, and it's going to turn milky, as if you put milk. So when clear lime water turns milky, it's a positive test for carbon dioxide. Okay, so exhaled air is often at a higher temperature than inhaled air. Because when you exhale the air, remember you must have been exhaling air after you're exercising because you used oxygen. You were a bit active and then you're exhaling. So when you exhale air, that air is going to be hotter. Why? Because it's coming from your lungs, it's coming from the outside it's cold, but from inside your body is hot, it's 37.5, but outside it's cold. So even on a cold day, you just walk. You know you're breathing because you can see the invisible steam coming out of your mouth. Why? Because inside your body it's hot and air is moving out. It's exhaled air. It has a higher temperature than the atmospheric air. And that's why you can see that steam. So exhaled air is at a higher temperature than the inhaled air because it's coming from within the body. Because the body temperature, remember, is 37.5. Now we want to test whether the air we breathe out is having carbon dioxide. Lime water, we use lime water, and that lime water is going to use to test whether CO2 is exhaled from the human lung. And when the lime water turns milky when it's blown through a straw, right, you can see it turn milky, it's a positive test. That is a positive test for carbon dioxide being exhaled. All right. Now, learners, this is very important. You're going to be tested next year. The effect of exercise on the breathing and the pulse rate in humans. So this is part of the brain. Okay. You're going to learn this part next year, that this is the cerebrum. It says the largest part of the brain. You'll learn about the functions next year. Then you have another part here called the corpus callosum. You'll learn about how it joins the two parts of the two hemispheres of the brain. Then you're going to have here something called the hypothalamus, which controls our water balance. Then you're going to have a little pituitary gland here, which is called a master endocrine gland. Then you have your spinal cord here. And just above the spinal cord is a little part called the medulla oblongata. You need to know that it is the medulla oblongata of the brain that controls our rate and depth of breathing. So here is the medulla oblongata. All right. So it's not the swollen pons. Just below the swollen pons is your medulla oblongata, and below your medulla oblongata is your spinal cord. So when you are looking at this diagram in an exam, then you must know the lowest point is the spinal cord, the little bit more swollen point is the medulla, and the very stubborn, very swollen part is called the pons. All right. Now let's see. What's the effect of exercise on the breathing rate? Breathing is controlled by the respiratory center in the medulla oblongata. Now learners, you must have experienced when you are jogging, automatically your mouth would open. No one can run with their mouth completely closed. You would fall down. So when you are running, automatically, without telling your body, your heart will beat fast. Without you telling your body, your mouth will open and your breaths coming out will be faster and more. So that is what? The rate and depth of breathing. And it's going to be controlled by what we call the medulla oblongata. So the medulla oblongata controls the speed, that means how fast and how many. The speed or the rate and the depth of your breathing. There's it. During exercise and during activities. So breathing is controlled by the respiratory center, the medulla oblongata of the brain. And here is this supposed to be the actual medulla oblongata here above the spine. And they say, when a person is actively exercising, the time between each breath shortens and the breathings become deeper. So if you're running, your rate and depth of breathing will increase. So you're going to take more breaths in that minute and it's going to be deeper because now you are taking in more oxygen, you need more energy. Okay. So when a person is actively exercising, automatically his heart's going to beat faster and his breathing rate is going to increase. So when a person is actively exercising, the time between each breath shortens. So now instead of it being each breath going like that on land, when the person is now actively exercising and his rate and depth of breathing increases, he's going to be, so it's going to be what? Going to go like that, isn't it? The rate and depth of breathing is going to increase very, very rapidly. So a person who's actively exercising, the time between each breath becomes deeper and shorter. So see how long it takes between that breath, then that breath, then that breath. But look here, how fast is time. Okay. Now this is a very important diagram, learners, and it can come definitely in your final exams and also in your third term control tests. So this is showing you two diagrams, okay. Now you need to see that this is X, it's a blood vessel. So this X is a blood vessel and it's going to coil around the capillaries and it's going to leave now. That is the arteriole. You can see it's an artery, it's a big blood vessel. It forms a capillary of network of capillaries, and then all the capillaries we're going to join and leave as a vein. So what's going to be here is a vein, and what's going to be here is an arteriole. And all this here is a network of capillaries. So between an artery bringing blood in and a vein leaving the surface, between them is a network called a capillary network. What is this showing you? My alveolus. What is this showing you? My blood capillary. What are these? My red blood cells. Now let's see. Identify part A. So this is not a blood vessel. This is part A. And what will that be? That will be a bronchus or bronchiole. Can you see that? Next one. What is the process represented by 1 and 2? Something is going to move through the thin membranes to the blood, and from the blood through the moisture into the lungs. What is this process? It's gaseous exchange, okay? Or you can even say diffusion. List two features visible on the diagram that makes the above structure an efficient respiratory surface. So what are the two things in this diagram that you can see that makes it an efficient? Yes, we can see a very, very thin membrane. Can you see all these dots here, learners? That is a layer of moisture, because the gases must enter in a dissolved form. It's a single membrane that is going to be thin, right? Thin. You can see you can see moisture. You can see the alveolus is very rounded, means large surface area. Large surface area. You can see that the blood vessel and the alveolus are in close contact. Even here, you can see the alveolus of the lung and the blood is in close contact. So close contact. And the fact that it has a blood transport system to transport the gases to and from the lungs, that means this alveolus is satisfying your 5 requirements. Single layer of squamous epithelium for rapid diffusion. That is thin. There's moisture on the inside of the alveolus for gases to enter in a dissolved form. The alveolus is pouch-like, giving it a large surface area. The blood capillary and the alveolus are in close contact for rapid diffusion of gases. The blood capillary is in close contact with the alveolus to transport the gases from the cells to the blood and from the blood to the cells. So there's a transport. So all 5 requirements are met in the gaseous exchange system of the human being. And you must see, children, when they say explain, you give a statement and a reason, like saying alveolus is pouch-like. You don't just stop there. It's pouch-like to give it a large surface area for maximum diffusion of gases. The alveolus has a thin squamous epithelium, thin, for rapid diffusion of gases. The inner lining of the alveolus has moisture for gases to be transported in a solution form. It can't be dry. Gases won't enter through a dry skin. Remember, there must be moisture. What else? The alveolus and the blood are in close contact for rapid diffusion, not just diffusion, but rapid diffusion of gases. And there is a blood transport system to bring carbon dioxide to the lungs for exhalation and to take oxygen from the lungs to the cells. So that's the transport for cellular respiration. So that's how your 5 requirements are being satisfied. All right, in the human body. Okay, so let's just now take that. Okay, list 2 features visible on the diagram that makes the above structure an efficient respiratory surface. This question must come in the exam. And we said, you can say many alveoli or alveoli are pouch-like, right, for rapid diffusion of gases or maximum diffusion of gases. Presence of blood capillary serves as a transport method. Okay, you can talk about we said 2, but you can also talk about, remember, moisture, close contact, blood transport system, all right, large surface area, thin. Okay. Again, can you see how many different types of questions can come on the very same diagram? So your end of the year November paper together with your control test 3 must have questions on the gaseous exchange. And it's also going to be related very much to your grade 12 syllabus. So let us see. Now these 2 arrows are showing you what? That's not diffusion. This arrow is showing you what? Inhalation, that is this arrow coming down. And that arrow going out is showing you exhalation. So this is showing you your breathing, your inhalation and your exhalation process. All right. This blood, this A, that means this is blood coming to the lungs. That's going to be rich in carbon dioxide. This blood is going to leave the lungs at B. It's going to be rich in oxygenated blood. So blood rich in carbon dioxide coming to the lungs, coming in the blood to the lungs. This blood is containing more CO2. It's going to be deoxygenated blood. The blood that leaves the lung, because oxygen is going to move from the lungs to the blood that leaves the lung to go to the heart is going to be called oxygenated blood. So at B, that's oxygenated blood, and at A, that's going to be deoxygenated blood. So name the type of epithelial tissue numbered 1 and 2. So number 1 is going to be the epithelium of your blood capillary, which is called your endothelium, and number 2 is going to be your squamous epithelium. All right. So it's going to be your thin squamous epithelium. So even your blood capillary, it's called endothelium because it's inside, but the walls of your blood capillary and the walls of your alveolus is made up of thin layer of squamous epithelium. Identify blood cell label 3. This blood cell which is biconcave disc, no nucleus, is called a red blood cell, an erythrocyte. Why is it biconcave? Why doesn't it have a nucleus? Because in place of the nucleus there is space, and in that space there's lots of red pigments called hemoglobin to carry maximum amount of oxygen. Okay, so just go back here, and I just want to indicate, children, that your erythrocytes, okay, that your erythrocytes can carry oxygen in the form of oxyhemoglobin, right? And also your erythrocytes can carry oxygen in the dissolved in solution in the plasma. Okay, that's the 2 forms in which oxygen is carried. And that carbon dioxide in the blood is carried in the form of carb hemoglobin, but there's going to be less carbon dioxide. Most of the carbon dioxide, the higher percentage, is carried in the form of sodium bicarbonate. So carbon dioxide a little bit is carried by hemoglobin, but hemoglobin attracts oxygen more than carbon dioxide. But you do get a small amount of carbon dioxide that is attaching itself to hemoglobin. It's called carb hemoglobin. But what is the maximum, what is the highest level in which carbon dioxide is carried in the blood? In what is the greatest form in which carbon dioxide is carried in the blood? It's carried in the form of sodium bicarbonate. That's the maximum form in which carbon dioxide is carried. What's the maximum form in which oxygen is carried in the blood? Oxyhemoglobin. Right. And the other way in which oxygen is traveling is in the plasma, in a solution. It's dissolved in the water of the blood. And carbon dioxide, small amount is carried in the form of carbohemoglobin, and then a little bit is dissolved in the plasma, and then it's called carbonic acid. So there's 3 forms in which you can see carbon dioxide. Carbonic acid, like that. Sodium bicarbonate, which is your sodium NaHCO3, which is your sodium bicarbonate, and this is just a little bit of hemoglobin with carbon dioxide. So they can ask you, list 3 ways in which carbon dioxide is carried in the blood. Solution in plasma in the form of carbonic acid. Main form is in the form of sodium bicarbonate, and a little bit of carbon dioxide carried as carbohemoglobin. What are the 2 main forms in which oxygen is carried? As a solution or dissolved in plasma, and the main form is carried in the form of oxyhemoglobin. What's hemoglobin? It's a red pigment. The pigment, the minute it combines with oxygen, it makes it red. So when your cheeks are red, it means there's more blood flowing to your skin surface. It means there's more oxygen that is in your skin. Because when you are red, and it means maybe you are more active as well. Okay, so you need more oxygen. So what pigment is found in the cell mentioned in the previous question? So what's the previous question? Your red blood cell, okay? So what pigment is found in your red blood cell or erythrocyte? The pigment is called hemoglobin. Which type of blood enters the blood capillary at A? So what type of blood is going to enter at A? So now this blood here is coming from where? It's in the blood. So this blood is coming from your cells. So what type of blood is entering the blood capillary at A? What type of blood? Not gas, but blood. It's going to be called deoxygenated blood. And what gas is that? That is blood rich in carbon dioxide gas. So what type of blood leaves the blood capillary at B? What blood is leaving the alveolus surface at B? The type of blood that's going away from the lungs. Going from the lungs, there's a gas that enters from the lungs to there, and then B is going to be having a high concentration of that. That's going to be what? Oxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood. Can you see? Because the oxygen is going to move from the alveolus from all sides. The oxygen is going to enter and it's going to leave as oxygenated blood. So the gas is oxygen, but the blood is going to be oxygenated blood. Here the gas is CO2, but the blood is deoxygenated. Right. In which form is most oxygen carried in the blood? What is it? Most. Most oxygen is carried in the form of oxyhemoglobin. Then supply 2 structural adaptations of the alveolus which makes them well suited for gaseous exchange. So there could be 5, but you must only name any 2. So structural adaptation means you don't just say thin and moist. You name the adaptation, right? And you say exactly how does it fit into the lung. So let's see. There's so many you could choose from. That first of all, the alveolus is rounded to increase the surface area. For what? For maximum gaseous exchange, okay? The alveolus is thin. We said it has a single layer of squamous epithelium for rapid diffusion of gases from the lungs to the blood, okay? The alveolus is richly supplied with blood capillaries. For what? To transport the gases to the lung and from the lung, but for transport. The alveolus, remember, it was like this and it had little dots. What are those dots on the inside of alveolus? It's moisture. the alveolus is moist for gases to enter easily in a solution form, dissolved form. All right. So we spoke about large surface area, we spoke about thin, we spoke about transport system, we spoke about moist, and what else? Yeah, well, we're speaking only about the alveolus. So that's just looking at the alveolus. Although close contact is a requirement, but just focusing on the alveolus, we know it's rounded, it's pouch-like, it has a thin cell membrane, and it has lots of blood capillaries there, and it's moist. And plus, you can say the blood capillaries are in close contact. Okay, that goes, but close. Now that is not looking at the alveolus, close contact. We're just looking at the structure of the alveolus. Thin, it has moisture, it is pouch-like, okay, and it is richly supplied with blood capillaries. That's why a healthy lung will be pink in color, because of the numerous blood capillaries that are in direct contact with it. So a healthy lung is pink, and a diseased lung, a lung whereby people smoke a lot of cigarettes, that's going to be gray in color. All right. Now, describe how carbon dioxide is exchanged at cellular level and transported to the lungs to be exhaled. So, describe how carbon dioxide is exchanged at cellular level and then transported to the lungs to be exhaled. So, what are you going to talk about there, Learners? You're going to talk about the cell after respiration. It's going to release what? CO2. The CO2 is going to be carried in the form of sodium bicarbonate in the blood. Then it's going to be, that is going to be called deoxygenated blood. It's going to go to the heart by the superior and inferior vena cava, remember? Then the heart is going to pump that deoxygenated blood that came from the superior and inferior vena cava. The heart is going to pump that deoxygenated blood where? It's going to pump it to the lungs, okay? And then when it gets into the lungs, it's going to be exhaled. So let's read. Let's read it here now. Let's just erase this. Okay. So the cells will have a high carbon dioxide concentration. Why? Due to cellular respiration. This is a very important fact, no? Due to cellular respiration. Now, this carbon dioxide from the cells are going to move out into the blood. The carbon dioxide moves out of the cells into the blood. Most of the carbon dioxide is going to be transported in the blood plasma in the form of bicarbonate ions. So most of this carbon dioxide in the blood will be transported in the form of bicarbonate ions, and then it's going to be transported to the heart and then to the lungs, where the lungs is going to exhale that CO2. So here we explained carbon dioxide going from the cells to the blood, from the blood to the heart, heart to the lungs, and then it's going to be exhaled. Okay. Describe the gaseous exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the alveolus. So 5 marks. All right. So what will you discuss there, learners? That the air entering the alveoli has a high concentration of oxygen. So air that enters the alveoli from the outside has a high concentration of oxygen compared to the oxygen concentration in the blood. So because we're inhaling air with oxygen, there will be more oxygen in the lung than in our blood that's close to the lung. Okay. This results in oxygen diffusing, moving from the alveolus into the blood. You have to practice how to write this. The inhaled air has lower carbon dioxide compared to the blood, because now when we inhale air, we don't inhale a lot of carbon dioxide. It's only 0.04%. But the inhaled air has more oxygen and less CO2. So obviously the oxygen will move from a high concentration in the lung to the blood. but the blood coming to the lung has high concentration of CO2. So the CO2 will move from the blood to the lung. So the carbon dioxide will definitely diffuse now from the blood to the alveolus to be exhaled. Do you understand that, learners? Let us say it one more time. How does gaseous exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide occur at the alveolus, which is your lung? So what you're going to say? You're going to say that the air that is inhaled from the outside to the lung has a high concentration of oxygen. This creates a diffusion gradient between the air in the alveolus of the lung and the blood. The blood will have a low concentration of oxygen. So oxygen will diffuse from the alveolus into the blood to be carried to the cells for respiration. After respiration, the blood that leaves the cells has a high concentration of carbon dioxide compared to the lungs. So there's a diffusion gradient between the blood and the alveolus of the lung. Carbon dioxide will move from the blood by diffusion through the thin membranes of the blood capillary and the lung into the alveolus, into the lung. Now there's a high concentration of carbon dioxide in the lung compared to the outside, and what happens? Carbon dioxide will be forced out of the lung during exhalation. Okay. Now let us look at the composition of inhaled and exhaled air in this table. Here we see there is gases. The difference in composition of three main gases after exercise and while we're sleeping. Okay, so here's a person who's sleeping and here's a person who's exercising. Now nitrogen is called an inert gas. We don't use nitrogen for anything. Only plants can use nitrogen from the soil to make proteins. So we cannot inhale nitrogen to make proteins. So that whatever nitrogen we inhale, we also will exhale it. So you can see in the inhaled air, it's 78% nitrogen, and also in the exhaled air. Whether you are sleeping or exercising, you will still exhale the same 78% because nitrogen is not used for any purpose in the body if it's inhaled. Okay? So it will come in and it will just move out via exhalation. But oxygen is the active gas. It's the active gas that we need. So when we inhale it, we're taking in 21% of oxygen from the air into the lungs. So a person who's sleeping, remember the body is still active, so we need some oxygen. So out of the 21%, it seems like we use about 5% of oxygen, or 4 to 5% of oxygen when you're sleeping. Now, that is there, right? So here is this one here. When you are sleeping, you are exhaling 16%, which means you used 4%. Now, when you exhaled air, after you exercise, you're going to what? See, 21 minus 16 is 4. 21 minus 12 is going to be 9. So the exhaled air is going to have only 9% oxygen, which means now we're going to use up more oxygen than what we inhaled when you are exercising. Okay, and when you exercise, you're going to breathe out more carbon dioxide. So when you are sleeping, you breathe less carbon dioxide because your cells were less active. It produces less CO2 when you're sleeping. But when you're exercising, your cells will produce, there's more respiration, more activity, your cells will produce more carbon dioxide in the exhaled air. Okay, and oxygen that you inhale, remember you're inhaling that, you're using 4, but you find that your exhaled air, right, it's going to have actually less oxygen because you're going to use more oxygen when you are going to inhale the oxygen. When you're inhaling oxygen, learners, there's 21%, okay? When you're exercising, the air that you exhale is going to have far, far more less oxygen than what you inhale because you're going to use up more oxygen during your exercise. So you can see here, the air in the atmosphere is made up of nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide together with water vapor. Right, the inhaled air has the same composition of as the atmospheric air. So the inhaled air, the air that we take in, has the same composition of the air that's outside. But the exhaled air is going to be different. The exhaled air is going to have what? Less oxygen, because we're going to use it up due to the oxygen being used up, and it's going to have more carbon dioxide after respiration. So let us see now. What is the difference between the percentage of oxygen inhaled and that exhaled from a sleeping person? So now you must put your pencil and say we are going to look at only this, because they're talking about a sleeping person. So what's the difference in percentage of, see, it's already written in a percentage. It's already written in a percentage. Ne? So now they want to know what's the difference in percentage of oxygen inhaled. Let's see what we inhaled in a sleeping person. We inhaled 16% oxygen when you were sleeping, right? And that exhaled. So when we exhaled air now, when we exhaled in a sleeping person, we exhaled only 4. Can you see that? We exhaled only 4% oxygen, which, so here it's going to be 21 minus 16 is 5. They made a mistake here, okay, but actually this is carbon dioxide, which means now we used 5%, which means only 5% was used by a sleeping person. So a sleeping person inhales 21, but the exhaled air is containing 16% oxygen, which means the person used 5% of oxygen. Oxygen, this level is oxygen. So if you inhale 21 and when you exhale the air it has 16, where did the difference of 5 go to? It was used by your cells for respiration. Okay. Now, what is the percentage oxygen used by the body in inhalation of a person who's exercising? So now we're going to look at oxygen again. Now we're going to look at the person exercising. So the person exercising inhaled 21% of oxygen, right? But when he exhaled the air, right? When he exhaled air, you find now 21 minus 12. What is it going to be? 21 minus 12 is going to be 9. So he's exhaled air here, okay? It means now he's having 12% of oxygen that is exhaled. He's having 12% of oxygen that exhaled, which means he used 9%. So when he is sleeping, the person used 5%. Out of the 21%, he used 5 because he breathed out 16. So 5 was used. But when he was exercising, the amount of oxygen that that was exhaled was 12 out of the 21, which means he used 9%. So a person who is exercising uses more oxygen, 9%, compared to a person who's sleeping, which is 5%. So people who are sleeping or resting use less oxygen because the muscles are less active. But people who are exercising will use more oxygen because you need more respiration to produce more energy. And that's why the air that's exhaled will have a smaller portion of oxygen. Okay, so you can see here it's 16, the exhaled air, and here it's 12. So they exhaled less oxygen when they were exercising, and they exhaled more oxygen when they were sleeping, which means if they exhale more oxygen when they're sleeping, they used more oxygen. When they exhale less oxygen when they were exercising, because they used more. Okay, do you understand that, learners? Just look at this. There are worksheets that are available for you to go through and use and understand it, right? Same thing. The table below obtained results from an experiment where 2 learners were recorded using their heart rates and their breathing rates, okay, during exercising and walking and running. So, let us look at it. What is the aim of the investigation? Here the table shows results from an experiment where 2 learners recorded their heart rates and breathing rates at rest after walking up and down the stairs. So what you need to determine, you want to determine what is the breathing and heart rate of a person during exercise and rest. So what will be the aim? To determine the effect of exercise or activity on the heart rate and breathing rate of 2 learners, because here you're talking about 2 learners. So you can't be general, because your investigation is you want to know the heartbeat and the breathing rate. To investigate the breathing rate and heartbeat of 2 learners during different activities. Can you see that? When you're resting, when you're walking and running, you are looking at the heartbeat and the breathing rate of 2 learners during different activities. So the aim is always, you start off an aim to determine or to investigate the breathing rate, what you can control. You can, you want to know, you can control the activities. To investigate the heartbeat and the breathing rate of 2 learners during different activities. And you could control the activities. So remember, we said type of activity is independent variable, but you can't control the breathing rate, how many breaths, and you can't control how many heartbeats there are in a minute. So that becomes your dependent variable. Your heart rate and your breathing rate are dependent on the y variable. Okay, y axis. So let us see. Okay, we've got that one. What do you observe? Same question. What do you observe happened to the heart rate of both learners after running up the stairs? So these are the 2 learners, and when they ran up the stairs, the heart rate, we want to know what happened to the heart rate. So you look at this column here. Of both these learners when they ran up the stairs, can you see, compared to resting and walking, it increased almost double to 112. Even in learner 2, the heart rate has increased. Both their heart rate increased to above 100. The heart rate increased to above 100 beats per minute. This BPM means the heart rate increased to over, see here it's 60, but this is over 100. So the heart rate increased to over 100 beats per minute. That is the value that you must put in. Same question, same scenario, different question. What do you observe happened to the breathing rate? Now we look at this column. To the breathing rate of both the learners after running up the stairs. Let's see now. Both the breathing rates. See, it was resting, they were just breathing at a normal value of 12. But when they ran up the stairs, the breaths per minute increased above 12. Not just increased, but the breaths per minute increased to above 12. You can see both learners' breathing rate increased when running above the stairs above 12 breaths per minute. That's what you have to say. That both the learners, the breathing rate per minute increased to above 12. Okay. Write a conclusion that can be drawn from the above experiment. What conclusion can we see now when person's running and walking and sleeping? Right? What conclusion can we talk about? Both learners' heart rates and breathing rates increased from rest to running compared to just walking due to the increase in carbon dioxide level. Now, what causes our breathing rate to increase, learners, is that when you exercise, right, your levels of CO2 in the blood is going to increase. And these high levels of CO2 in the blood will stimulate your heart to beat faster and your breathing rate to increase so that you can get rid of carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide cannot stay in the body. It's a poisonous gas. So the conclusion is that exercise or strenuous activity like running will always increase the heartbeat and breathing rate per minute due to the high levels of CO2 that accumulate when your person is active, and this cannot remain in the body. Okay. The next one. Okay, here. Let us erase that. Okay, so this actually now, learners, brings us to the end of the lesson. You've seen data tables, you've seen graphs, you've seen an investigation, you know how to write an aim, you know what's an independent variable, what you can control. Dependent variable is what you're going to measure. You don't know about it, you're still going to measure it, but what you can control is an independent variable. A conclusion is always what you notice about the investigation at the end. What can you sum up about what you saw and observed, about the heartbeat and breathing rate at different activity levels, okay? And that our heartbeat and breathing rate will always increase during exercise due to the high levels of CO2, which we can discuss in the next lesson regarding homeostasis, which you're going to do in grade 12. Please learn the breathing mechanisms of inhalation and exhalation, which one's active, which one's passive. Why is it active? Because of the muscles. The contract is passive because the muscles relax. Know the two breathing muscles, diaphragm and intercostal muscles. Know what the muscles do to the volume, that the diaphragm, when it contracts, the volume of the thoracic cavity increases from top to bottom. And when your rib cage, your intercostal muscles contract, your rib cage moves up and out, increasing the volume. And increase in volume means less pressure. Decrease in volume means high pressure. And air always moves from high pressure to low pressure, and gases always move from a high concentration to a low concentration. So if you know that, learners, you will do well in gaseous exchange, and it has a high mark allocation of 23 out of 150 in your paper 2. Thank you.